What's up, guys? I'm Icarus Moth, here with 343 Labs, doing a little tutorial with you today with Ableton. Sometimes you need to do a quick master, be it, if you're doing work for somebody else, or if you don't have very long to work on a song, can't send it off to an engineer, maybe can't afford it, don't have the time. So we're gonna go over how you can just bust one out in maybe a couple of minutes, just to send off a good demo. So I've got a pre-master pulled up here. We're making sure that it's peaking around -6 decibels, somewhere around -5, -6, just like that. I've already put the plugins on the master cooking show style, so we can work backwards through this, and it can be real quick and simple like it should be when you're doing it for yourself. So we're gonna start on the left, being Isotope's Alloy 2. We're gonna be using just the de-esser function in this plugin, and if you throw it on 10K hertz to 20K hertz, it's going to only compress the air in the song, which is going to give the high end right underneath it much more room to breathe. And you don't even need to adjust this threshold. I personally like to have it just barely touching the transients, just like this. It will especially help your snare breathe and will bring out the hi-hats in your song quite a bit. The next plugin is going to be the Oxford Inflator. I don't actually have access to this as an effect, but I can still look at it because I'm not plugged into a universal audio device right now. However, it is very simple. The only thing you're going to do is make sure clip is off and that your effect amount is somewhere between like 20% and 60%. This is to taste, so you can do more or less than that, but that seems to be kind of the safe region here. So I'll just toss that somewhere around 20 and move on. The next thing we're going to be using is a compressor. So this is SSL compressor by Waves. I like this one particularly because it is pretty subtle. It doesn't add a lot of harmonic content to the song. It really is just gain staging. What we're going to have this set to is the threshold all the way up. Make sure your makeup is somewhere around 0.1. I just like to type in 0.1 here. Your attack is all the way up to 30 and your release is all the way down to 0.1. So it's hardly doing anything. It's only really going to be capturing the transients. You can leave the ratio on 4. If it's too loud, you can put it down to 2. And you'll see when I'm playing the song, the little dial here on the meter is not moving at all. That is actually what you want to see. If you A/B this, you'll still hear a difference in the dynamics of the song. So this is just tidying up stuff at the very beginning. The main event is going to happen in Ozone 8 here. This incorporates a lot of different mastering devices into one plugin, which makes it really simple and kind of one of the perfect plugins to use when you're doing a quick master. So I have all of the devices that we're going to be using already placed here in order. I just haven't tuned in, the actual settings quite yet. So this is the order you're going to want to use. Sometimes it makes sense to flip these around and A/B it, see what sounds best. But I find in my experience that having the equalizer come first, then dynamics, imager, exciter, spectral shaper, and then maximizer does give you the easiest result. We're going to be using the equalizer to remove the sub-content from the stereo. So we'll make sure to put this in mid-side mode by clicking this M.S button and then clicking on the side option here. You can solo this to hear what the stereo content of the song sounds like. This will not come through anything on mono. So we're going to want to dial in the low cut here so that no sub is coming through the stereo field. This is going to ensure that no phasing happens with your kick drum or with your bass. This is going to be really important when you're performing live. A lot of venues do use mono systems, and if you have sub material phasing itself out, you can get a very different result when you're actually performing at a venue than what it sounds like in your headphones per se. So the next thing we're going to move on to is the dynamics. Especially when it comes to quick mastering, I do like to start with the preset here. You certainly don't have to, but the Modern Dynamics preset is very straightforward and doesn't quite change, the harmonic content of your song either. It's just a very straightforward. So we do dial these in a little bit. I generally don't touch the high-end bands because they're pretty fixed. But the low in the mid band you can dial into your song. I'll do that here. For a quick master, I generally like to pull the compression threshold down just a little bit so that I can actually catch the transient, and I do actually like to set the limiter to 0.1 on the mid band there. This plugin will be especially useful for fixing an extra loud kick drum or a really tubby bass. you can pull those down a little bit. So the next one we're going to be moving on to is the imager. This is going to focus on the stereo content of your song and the stereo width of your song. This is where you'll first use the learn function that Ozone provides for us. So you'll pick a part of your song that is pretty harmonically rich using a lot of the elements of your song all at the same time, and you'll click the learn function. I've already done this, so it didn't really move much, but it will snap these bands to where Ozone thinks they should be for this effect. So what we're going to do with band 1, which is focusing on low-end content, is just set it to -1%. That's it. We only want to move the low-end content further to the middle of the mix because, again, we're trying to combat phasing in a mono environment, and it also just kind of helps the other instruments sit on top of the mix. Now we're trying to spread things from here on out, so I'll set the mid band to 2 and the high band to 5. Again, these are to taste, so you can do these however you'd like, but when I'm doing a quick master, these are the numbers that I jump to. We will not be using the stereoize feature here. And you can actually use this little visualizer on the right to see how wide certain content is in your song, how mono, etc. Moving on, we're going to actually use the exciter here. Again, we're going to use the learn feature. And I do like to remove the 4th band, so we're only dealing with 3. It seems to be a bit of a cleaner way to go here. So we will learn again. Okay, again, I had done that previously, so it didn't move much. But one thing that you're definitely going to want to keep in mind when it comes to the exciter is this little oversampling button. This is just going to give you a higher quality saturation, and it's going to just sound better in the long run, so I do recommend having that on. I'm not going to get into what that is today. I do like to use tape, but your different forms of saturation are up to you. Depending on what song you depending on what song you have, different forms of saturation will do better for you. But for me, tape is just quick and easy and provides a good saturation on the high end for most tracks. So I'll dial this in now. So you don't want to push this too hard. Once you find the sweet spot, you do want to pull the mix back quite a bit, or else it will become harsh on many different speakers. I'll do the same thing for the mids, but we are not actually going to touch the low-end saturation here because that could create some distortion, some muddiness, some phasing that we're not going to want in the song. So I'll be using tube for the mids, actually, because I do like that one here. I generally find myself being more subtle with the mid saturation than I do with the high end saturation. There's always a little bit more room in the high end to push it. Now we're going to be moving on to the spectral shaper. This is a pretty fancy plugin. It's a little new. It does a lot of different things. So the way that I'm using this is not necessarily the way that you're going to want to use it, but it is focused on the low end here. This band is representing the frequency range. So right now I'm only targeting everything between 0 and 40 hertz. Essentially, this is sub-cleanliness. We're going to make sure, again, that there's no phasing going on, that there's no muddiness in my low end, because that really does help other aspects of the mix stand out, and it also helps you make it louder in the end. So the settings I have here just have the threshold barely catching the sub, and this tone knob is really what's doing it. If I were to pull this down, it would cut my sub a lot more instead of actually sort of saturating it. It's not what it's doing, but it almost sounds like what it's doing. And then my attack and release settings are fixed for the low-end content as well. So, in case this is triggered by a kick drum, I'm not going to be ruining the dynamics of my kick drum. So moving on to the final maximizer, this is the last thing we're going to be doing. There are different modes here on the left for maximizing. IRC4 on modern is easily going to give you the cleanest result quickly, but you might find that dialing in some of these other settings does better for you. It just all depends on the time that you want to spend here. I prefer to have my ceiling at -0.3. That seems to do pretty good on most devices. It's not going to give you any digital distortion, any analog distortion. So the character, again, is going to be based on the song you use. I generally start around 1.6 and then, add 0.1 to 0.2 up or down depending on what the song wants. And then from this point forward, we're just going to make sure that the threshold is capturing as much of the song as it can without squashing it. So you'll see what I mean. I'll push the maximizer a little bit harder than I should, and you'll understand what squashing is. Now, so that doesn't sound great, right? So we're gonna wanna walk close to that line, but not cross it. So you'll usually be able to use the visualizer to find that point, but it's all about your ears. Don't focus too much on what you're looking at. Pay attention to what you're listening to. Okay, so now that I have a basic maximizer setting dialed in, I'll group all this stuff together and we'll do a quick A/B to hear the difference. So there you go. Got a lot more warmth, a lot more brightness, and it is also a lot louder than when we started. So yeah, if you need a quick way to get a nice professional-ish sounding master, send something off to maybe someone you're working with who knows why you don't have the time to do it properly. This is a great way to get a nice clean mix on something right off the bat and not have to spend too much time on it. I'm Nathan, here with 343 Labs. You can catch me on Spotify at Icarus Moth, and thanks for watching.